Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you all back to the second day of this conference. I think the hardcore concerned people are here today, while the others disappeared. And also this morning topic actually overlaps the yesterday's topic, but I think we can go further, or we can cover the points we missed yesterday. I'm Kang Choi. I'm very honored to moderate this session. Unfortunately, Chaibong could not be with us this morning, but he'll be joining soon after finishing the meetings. It is my great honor to chair this session because actually I'm very much in great debt to all the ambassadors here. There's Ambassador Sung-Joo and Ambassador Chris Hill and also Ambassador Hubbard. I have learned a lot from these people about the real policy issues as well as the theoreticals. Yesterday, actually, I moderated a session on future of the alliance. Because of my fault, we were not able to talk about some questions. I wasn't able to manage the time schedule very effectively. This morning, I tried my best to manage the time schedule and have more time for discussion. Of course, the title of this session is Dialogue of Ambassadors. I'm going to ask them to have more dialogue among themselves as well as dialogue with the audience. Of course, let me remind some points that was actually raised by the Dr. Jung-Woo about this. Like he actually specifically mentioned about some factors we have to take into account in visioning and also in realizing the alliance into the future. Like we should be carefully manage the special measures agreement. In other words, like a burden sharing issue or the ROK-US nuclear cooperation agreements. Those could be considered some minor or technical things. But if you go back to the era of the domain administration, the process of handling those issues actually damaged alliance very much and also created some kinds of anti-American or anti-Korean sentiment in both capitals. So we should be able to manage those issues very well. And of course, I think that from now on until 2015 or 17, I think there's other issues we have to discuss, like OPCON issue, what should be the alternative commander structure we will have. What about the China question? Actually, China was the main topic of the yesterday's session. Of course, how we are going to engage China, in what way. Of course, North Korea is maybe the most urgent one. But the China question just next to North Korea is quite strategic question we have to address among ourselves. So nowadays, actually, the Park Geun-hye administration announced what called comprehensive strategic alliance. So I haven't got the clear idea what that exactly means, but comprehensiveness covers not only the military, but also the other areas of concerns and of mutual interest. So you have to think about what kinds of things that actually means. I personally believe three things. Like we are sharing values, and we are sharing the vision. Finally, we are sharing the responsibilities, not only on the Korean Peninsula, but also at the global level. That's what I got from my understanding of this one. But on the other hand, we have to think about some kinds of unexpected challenges or factors. So I think that this session we will be able to identify what are the challenges ahead of us, and then we'll be ready to tackle or minimize the impact of the challenges in realizing comprehensive strategic alliance into the future. Let me remind you maybe one of the worst time in our alliance relations. That's starting from 2003 to 2005. Actually, many people were concerned about future of ROK-US alliance. We are very fortunate to have all ambassadors actually serve the ambassadorship during that period of time. Ambassador Sung-Joo was our ambassador to the United States. And Ambassador Chris Hill, actually, he was the assistant secretary, and before that he was an ambassador to Seoul. Also before that, actually, Ambassador Hubbard, actually he was the first one got into what very important key issue was like a Chosun mission incident, and also he had a very difficult time. But actually their experience will guide us and benefit us in tackling the challenges ahead of us. So I thought about how we are going to proceed these sessions. So I think that maybe we can discuss 4 topics. The first one is like lessons we have learned over the past decades or so. So what are the challenges? And secondly, I'd like to have their thought on their understanding or estimate of the current status of ROK-US alliance. The third part could be the desired end state of ROK-US alliance. Beyond we have to think about beyond the unification. what kinds of alliance system or what kinds of alliance we are talking about. Finally, in realizing that alliance or desired model or type of alliance, what are the challenges and questions to be addressed, and what are the proper strategies and approaches in realizing those goals. So there is no order actually. Some factors, some ideal model was suggested yesterday, so I cannot ask them to answer specifically on such topics I have, because they are ambassadors. I'm quite junior to them, so they will have their own freedom to choose the topic. So without further ado, but first of all, I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking for their appearance on this podium. And if you look at their last name, all ambassadors start his last name with H. We have 3 H's here. Han, Hill, and Hubbard. So, H clubs. Okay. So I'd like to invite Ambassador Han Sung-Joo for his comments on any subject he'd like to speak on. Please, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. I like this building very much with all the rooms and the myriads, except I can't hear others speak very well. I hope you can hear me speak as much better than I can hear others speak.
I'm sorry? Oh.
By way of answering the moderator's several good questions, I think I would focus on the topic that we have here, which is challenges for the alliance. And in the process, I should be addressing some of the questions that he raised. And I'll do this as briefly as I can, and usually I'm pretty brief with my remarks. I think I can think of 5 challenges for the alliance. And I'll probably mention them first. One is the challenge of domestic politics and domestic sentiments, so to speak. The second is the challenge of issues that exist between the United States and the Republic of Korea in relation to the alliance. The third is the challenge of the budget. The fourth is the challenge of the alliance structure. And the fifth is what I would call the challenge of the vision for the alliance. On the domestic politics side of it, thanks to North Korea and Kim Jong-un's leadership, especially during the past couple of years, the North Korean threat perception has trumped over any nationalistic sentiments that are in Korea, which tended challenge the alliance between the U.S. and South Korea with anti-Americanism, anti-alliance slogans, and so on. These have been quite muted now. But I think since the alliance itself is a very peculiar one, from the South Korean point of view, it was mainly directed against North Korea, which is in fact a part of Korea, and the constituents of North Korea are Koreans, and therefore, depending on the state of interstate, inter-Korea, that is North-South Korea relations, and depending on the evolvement of South Korean politics itself, who becomes president, which party takes over power, we can see another swing to more nationalistic sentiments. I would think 1/3 of the Korean population, roughly speaking, is already disposed somewhat against the alliance. The other third can be swayed one way or the other depending on the state of the inter-Korean relations and domestic politics. And only the next third would be fairly firmly and consistently in favor of the alliance. And if we add the atavistic expression of isolationist sentiments in the United States, which is beginning to be visible somewhat in recent years in the U.S., if we combine these two elements of domestic situation in our two countries, our alliance can face this kind of domestic politics challenge. On issues, there are, of course, several issues that can be a challenge. The first one, obviously, is how to deal with North Korea. And sometimes the South Korean government can be more hardline vis-a-vis North Korea. The U.S. administration can be more hardline, or the other way around. Fortunately, right now, the United States and the Republic of Korea, both the governments and the public at large, seem to be pretty much on the same page in how to deal with North Korea, with its very bellicose policy and stance, and even in relation to the issue of nuclear weapons and missile development and other weapons of mass destruction. Then I think there's the issue of trilateral relations. We already mentioned that there is the United States standing or sitting between very turbulent relations between Korea and Japan. I think given the U.S. responsibility in leaving the territorial issue ambiguous after the Second World War, given the U.S. ability to prevent any physical clash between Japan and Korea, and given the U.S. position as a country able to exercise moral authority or persuasion vis-a-vis Japan, and given the U.S. need to see the two countries, that is Korea and Japan, to work and cooperate together and lead Japan to veer away from the rightward movement, it behooves the United States to be involved in a more discreet but active way to try to deal with the issues that seem to trouble the two Koreas, that is Japan and the and Korea. And then there is another trilateral relations issue, that is Korea between the United States and China. There are issues such as when a new president is elected, which country the new president will have to visit first. And on this issue, there's no question so far. Everybody expects the new Korean president to visit the United States before visiting either China or Japan. But then there are other issues of which country South Korea should place priority on. There are issues such as whether to join the TPP or get into an FTA with China or not. There are other issues such as missile defense, joining the missile defense, issue of strategic flexibility. I can tell you that so far South Korea has shown reluctance to join missile defense, but South Korea accepted the idea of the strategic flexibility of U.S. military forces stationed in Korea. About the issue of U.S. presence, especially after the Korean unification, for example, about military exercises, naval exercises. China is very conscious of joint U.S.-Korea naval exercises on the Yellow Sea side of the peninsula, although North Korea has made it easier and more acceptable, less objectionable to such exercises by the United States and Republic of Korea. So I would say that this particular trilateral relations will not have any adverse effect on the alliance relationship. Even President Roh Moo-hyun, who was apparently more favorably disposed toward China than to the United States, could not weaken the alliance. In fact, he had to appoint me as his first ambassador to the United States for some reason that I don't know. Even after I told him I did not vote for him and I didn't really support his policies, he told me, that's why I'm appointing you as an ambassador. Then there is the challenge of the budget, and I don't need to go into that in any detail except to say that there are two aspects to it. One is the issue of cost sharing, who's paying what portion of the alliance, and the other is related but a separate matter, and what each country can spend. Obviously, the U.S. is having its own budget squeeze, and South Korea has its own limits, and this will give a serious challenge to the alliance. And then there's the challenge of the alliance structure, and as we have been hearing, there are also two major aspects, and one is whether the planned transfer of wartime operational control should take place as scheduled, as postponed, that is, by the end of 2015 or not. And the second question is whether, if it is to be done, how the all-important Combined Forces Command structure would be organized in a way that will not diminish the effectiveness and usefulness of such joint forces. The irony of this controversy is that we have the wartime operational control system now, so that that kind of system, that is, the United States exercising wartime operational control, will not be effective. It will not take place, actually. That is the whole purpose of having this kind of an arrangement. And therefore, it's not as if right now the United States is having operational control over Korean armed forces. In fact, peacetime operational control had been transferred already during my watch, that is back in 1994. And so even though the transfer and the transformation is supposed to take place, I think discussion is still going on, and the jury is still out whether we will actually follow that schedule or not. And finally, there's a challenge of the vision. We talk about the comprehensive and strategic alliance, but I don't think we have really given real substance to what it means. Clearly, it would mean an alliance that is now more than security, to a more comprehensive alliance. And it would be sharing military interests to sharing values and other aspects of our relationship. Just as NATO has been strengthened and expanding even after the reduction or the passing of the Soviet threat, we might have the main rationale for the alliance when it came into being might change, but we may still have a very strong reason to continue and expand the scope and activities of the alliance in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Hahm. Your review is quite complete and very comprehensive. I think you have given us much food for thought for further discussion. And now I'd like to invite Ambassador Chris Hill for his comments. Please, Ambassador.
Okay, so we won't go in chronological order because Ambassador Hubbard was in Seoul before I was there.
I think we agreed to do it in alphabetical order.
Oh, okay. Okay, very good. All right. Well, then I'll just give my comments. Let me say that yesterday we seemed to talk about the future of the alliance, and today, to some extent, we'll talk about the past of the alliance. But I do think that the past of what we dealt with, especially what Tom and I dealt with in Seoul, is, I think, very relevant to what the future will be. It does not mean that we're not going to have some problems in the future. I think today things are in about as good condition as they have been in many years. But I think we do need to be aware of some of these issues and the fact that these issues would come back. First of all, let me say, when I got there, to some extent, all the discussion about the fraying of the alliance and the problems of the alliance, I felt to some extent it was a little like the old joke about Wagner's music, that is, it's better than it sounds. Because when you started looking very specifically about where the relationship stood, it was actually not in bad shape. First of all, the opinions among elites were very good. The State Department, Foreign Ministry relationships were really quite extraordinary. Even with President Roh Moo-hyun, the Koreans committed themselves to some of these efforts in the Middle East, including sending troops to Iraq. That wasn't easy for anyone to do, and I think it did not necessarily mean that the Korean government at the time was convinced about what they needed to do in Iraq. I think it meant that they were convinced about what they needed to do for the U.S. ROK alliance. So I think in many respects it was a lot better than it seemed. That said, it was it was clearly undergoing some strain, and I think it has to do with a number of factors. I think one of the factors is that as Korean democracy emerged through the late 80s and continued through the 90s, you got a phenomena that you see in many countries, which is the fact that you have this kind of disintermediation that is, it wasn't just to define the relationship between what goes on in foreign ministry or State Department or embassy offices, but rather there was a new kind of public diplomacy dimension to the relationship. You could not talk to Korea anymore by just talking to the foreign ministry. You had to have a very healthy, very strong sort of public dimension to how you were dealing with things. Now, why that happened in Korea, as it happened in many other countries, I think it has to do with, to some extent, with social media. And I think Korea was one of the first to get going with social media. And I think that social media was under-evaluated by us at first as we tried to kind of grapple with the new forms of communication. So I think we managed to catch up with that, and certainly we've seen in our recent ambassadors, our current ambassador, Sung Kim, penultimate ambassador, Kathy Stevens, a real effort to be ambassadors to the Korean people as well as to the Blue House and foreign ministry. So I think this social media issue, this effort to try to communicate directly with publics has been a very important factor that we all were a little slow to embrace, but we've embraced it now. I think another problem with the alliance that I think has been overcome was the concept that somehow there was something not quite right about an alliance where too many people would talk about big brother, little brother relationships. You never hear that term, big brother and little brother, anymore, and that's a very good thing for the alliance. And I think one of the reasons is I think Americans got a little more sensitive about how, given the historical legacy, how we were coming across in Korea. I think we kind of corrected for some of that. But I think it also has to do with the fact that Korea is not only a player in Northeast Asia, it is in many respects now a global player. When you look at where Koreans are present around the world, it's an impressive diplomatic display, it's an impressive or diplomatic array, it's an impressive commercial, economic penetration of the rest of the world as well. You cannot go anywhere without seeing a Samsung telephone being sold. You can't go anywhere without seeing Korean goods on the market, and where you see Korean goods, you see Korean embassies, you see Korean think tanks, you see many things that are really make you understand that Korea is a country that has kind of a global perspective. I know that previous Korean president tried to kind of market this to the Korean people. Korean people said, we're not really interested. Frankly speaking, if his marketing didn't succeed in Korea, it succeeded in the rest of the world. And I think people were very impressed by that. And I think when the U.S. looked at the fact that we have a partner who's not only part of a legacy of war on the Korean Peninsula, but rather a partner who's a partner that we can work with in many different other parts of the world, that became for us an important development. We realized as writing our talking points for our senior officials that more and more of the talking points dealt with third country issues rather than just peninsula or straight bilateral questions. So I think that was another development, a very healthy development in the alliance. I mean, to be sure, there were some legacy issues that needed to be addressed. One was on the visa waiver, the visa issue. When you see Japanese tourists getting on airplanes, going to play golf in California and Hawaii, lining up to play golf in California, and then you see the Koreans lining up in front of the American embassy to get visas, you knew there was something wrong. And so I think it was very important that over the course of the early 2000s. And by the way, it wasn't easy because this was coming right after 9/11, and no one was interested in the U.S. in liberalizing visa regimes at the time. But it was, I think, very important that people, including Secretary Powell, but also Secretary Rice, understood the need to try to move ahead on that visa relationship. Now, you know, everyone in the foreign ministry understood visas. Everyone in the Blue House understood visas, or the Bank of Korea understood visas. But for the Korean people, that visa issue was far bigger than those of us who sit in offices think. So I think it was a very important step on our part, and it was for Korea a real step that, okay, they really are treating us as equals. That was crucial. Then there was the issue of the FTA. That required a big level of effort in the United States. I know there were many issues in Korea on that question. I know that for many Koreans it didn't seem, it either seemed too natural a step, that is, it should have been done yesterday, or really a step that was somehow neo-imperialist or something. There are a lot of opinions about it in Korea. But I can tell you, getting that through the Congress in the U.S. and getting people sensitized to the issue that this is a country that is doing, Korea is a country that is trying to play by the rules in every respect, that was very crucial. And to put the weight of the administration behind it, to work on congressmen. I know it was our mutual effort because a lot of work had to be done in Seoul as well. But I think people in Seoul, and especially the Korean public, looking over to the United States and seeing that, they really care. You know, this is not a project that comes for free. I mean, you've got to really, go to these congressmen, hold them by the lapels, tell them this is in our interest. When American industry objects, go to American industry, explain why this is done. When you have objections there, you come back and try to work with the Koreans in a way that doesn't create a situation where the Koreans feel we're using this as a pressure tactic, this kind of thing. I think these were very, very important steps in terms of modernizing that alliance and putting it on an equal footing. So visa waiver, the FTA, and then last but not least, our beloved little North Koreans. These are a people only a mother can love, frankly. I mean, they are about as difficult to deal with as anyone in the world. But I think the U.S. got itself into a tough position when we appeared to be a force trying to keep the Korean people apart. Now, we had very big differences, although we tried to keep them quiet, with the Roh Moo-hyun administration, which seemed to believe that there was more there in terms of potential with North Korea than we thought. And it was difficult to deal with at times, to hear President Roh Moo-hyun talk in terms that we just felt was completely wrong about North Korea. But the more we tried to resist this impulse from the Roh Moo-hyun government to affect some kind of rapprochement with North Korea, the more we tried to resist that, the bigger the problem we created among South Korean people, even people who are not so much Roh Moo-hyun voters. So we inadvertently created a situation where we seemed to be the country keeping Korean people apart. And in so doing, we contributed to a narrative, to me one of the real false narratives of our age, that somehow Korea was divided for nefarious purposes by great powers, including the U.S., for the purpose of keeping a great people down. So we inadvertently created to that kind of leftist narrative in Korea. And I think part of the proof of this is when you look at polling data at the time, I'm talking, 03, 04, 05, this kind of, at this time, polling data was showing that upwards of 45, 50% of South Korean people, and by the way, Roh Moo-hyun was not polling 50% at that point, he was somewhere much further down, but upwards of 45, 50% of Korean people were saying the United States was responsible for the North Korean nuclear aspiration. So when you've turned a people like a government like North Korea into some kind of victim, you've got the wrong policy and you've got to do something a little differently. So I think the decision of President Bush, whether he made the decision because we already had 2 wars going in Iraq and Afghanistan, whatever the reason for the decision, but the decision to embrace the 6-party talks, to try to work with China, to really work with the ROK, and I think the legacy of those 6-party talks is the degree of cooperation and comfort that the United States delegations had with the South Korean delegations. I think that also contributed to a sense that this alliance was for real. The last point I'd like to make is about this trilateral process, which to me was one of the most frustrating aspects of certainly my tenure, both as ambassador in ROK, but also assistant secretary. 2 democracies like Japan and ROK, notwithstanding the legacy of a long and difficult history, 2 democracies, both playing baseball, both doing all kinds of things, ought to be able to work together. And yet I found that when we held those trilateral meetings in anticipation of the 6-party process, I found I ended up as a kind of mediator between the ROK delegation and the Japan delegation. And I wasn't very happy with that. And we would finish these meetings barely on civil terms. And I talked to Secretary Rice and I said, I understand why we try to do this, but I'm telling you it's not working. I used an American colloquialism, which is, this dog doesn't hunt. I mean, it's just, we are not getting this done with this process. And maybe we should skip this. One time we had a lunch in Beijing with the Japanese and South Korean. This was early in the process, and the South Korean mediator didn't want to appear in front of the cameras with his Japanese counterpart. So I had to get up in front of cameras and say that the South Korean had to be called to his embassy for an urgent call. Actually, he was still in the restaurant. It was that bad. And so I felt very badly that we couldn't have fixed that problem. And the problem is still there today. It's not easy, and for reasons that go well beyond even the extraordinary breadth of this conference. I don't think we can discuss all the problems of why we've not been able to we writ large have not been able to get the ROK and Japan relationship. But that is the one thing that needs to be fixed. And one of the reasons it needs to be fixed is that, and this will be my last point, I didn't mean to talk this long, but one of the reasons it needs to be fixed is at the end of the day, there needs to be multilateralism in Northeast Asia. Now, multilateralism, as Secretary Albright said last night, Americans don't like that term. So I'll say there need to be multi-partnerships in Northeast Asia. There needs to be a much better sense of a system that is there, that is somehow working to prevent crises, a system that can manage these maritime issues. I mean, look, everyone in the world, except for Switzerland, has maritime issues. And so there's nothing wrong with having maritime issues. The wrong is that there's no real means to park the problems, to deal with them in some kind of multilateral baloney. There's no way to kind of manage it without it becoming a nasty bilateral fight, usually within newspapers, etc. So I had really fond hopes that out of the 6-party process that we would get some kind of Northeast Asia peace and security mechanism, which I think comes out to be NIAPSUM, whatever worst acronym I've ever heard. But anyway, I thought that would be the beginning of some kind of thing. But the only way that will work is if you get some real horsepower behind it. And so you need the U.S., you need the ROK, and frankly, you need the Japanese. And the Japanese had some real misgivings about all this multilateralism. They thought it was some sort of effort by the U.S. to downgrade bilateral relations, which it was not. I mean, we can have multilateral and bilateral, so there's a lot of suspicion. and it didn't work at all. So I hope that as we go forward with what is, if you look around the world, we do not have a better bilateral alliance than the ROK-U.S. alliance. There's just nothing better. Believe me, I've been to a lot of different parts of the world. This is really about the best. But we've got to use this alliance to somehow bring in other countries into a mechanism so that ultimately we can figure out ways to calm things down when they flare up, because things will flare up. Things will flare up in a way that, you won't believe it on Tuesday what is going to happen on Wednesday. So we've got to have that means to do that. We need to, I think, use this mechanism of multilateralism as we use the six-party talks as a platform for different configurations, one-on-one, one-on-two, 5-on-1, which is what I hope we get with the North Koreans. We need to have a means where the ROK and the U.S. can be talking to the Chinese together, where we can kind of make it clear there's no daylight between us. The North Korean foreign policy, to the extent I want to dignify North Korean thinking as by calling it a policy, is always to divide and conquer. Well, when they see that we're really together, they have no means to do that, and they're going to have to go back to fighting, choco pies or whatever they're worried about. But I think that is the real, so far, the unfinished business of our whole enterprise in this alliance is our failure to develop better multilateral structures, using the alliance as the means to reach out and do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Hill, for sharing your personal experience and observation over the years. Actually, he raised quite important two questions: the importance of the public diplomacy in the era of this IT and ICT. I think this is quite critical for both countries to engage the public to get the...
And I just want to stress, I mean, this is not just U.S. Korea.
Yeah.
It's not just Korea. I mean, it's all over the world. If you don't understand how to tweet and do this kind of stuff, you're going to have troubles in a bilateral relationship with country X. It's not just about Korea.
And also the other point he raised, the multi-center cooperation, how we are going to realize it. So the starting point should be the alliance, bilateral alliance, how we are going to expand the area of cooperation, and the structure itself is quite critical. I'm sure there will be lots of questions in the later stage. Finally, I'd like to invite Ambassador Hubbard for the comments. Please.
Well, thank you. I perhaps should have accepted Ambassador Hill's offer to go first, because he's left me without much to say, as has Ambassador Hahm. When I looked at this panel today, I realized exactly what you said, Mr. Che, that Dr. Che, that one of the things that unites us is that we all tried to manage the U.S.-ROK relationship during somewhat troubled times, and we've said a lot about the difficulties that we had in projecting unity on North Korea and other things during the period of when Roh Moo-hyun was president, along with George W. Bush. Yesterday, Ambassador Hahm mentioned another period where he and I were very active. That is when we had our presidents were Bill Clinton and Kim Young-sam, and there was a great deal of resentment in Korea on the part of the president that we were out in front on North Korea, and certainly a lot of ups and downs in the management of the relationship, which then Foreign Minister Hahm played a very large role in assuaging. But I think that's my first point, that whatever else we have going in the relationship, we need to have good relationships at the top. And fortunately, with President Lee Myung-bak and President Obama, we had both presidents recognizing the importance of the relationship, recognizing what we could do together, and working very hard to realize that, whether it was during the financial crisis, whether it was the process of getting the FTA approved. Those two presidents really recognized the importance of the relationship, worked it well, and I have every reason to believe that President Park Geun-hye will do the same thing. I think she impressed Americans greatly during her first official visit to Washington. As far as I can tell, the two presidents agreed on almost everything and certainly projected a very common position on dealing with North Korea, but her public events were also just tour de force. I think she created a wonderful impression here, and that brings me to the second point that Chris Hill has made very eloquently: the importance of somehow managing public opinion in both countries. When I left Korea as ambassador 9 years ago, I think there was deep concern on both sides in both countries over a drift in the relationship. That drift was sort of embodied in the perceived frosty relationship we had between the presidents. It was embodied in our interpretation and misinterpretation of events in both countries. I think Americans were really stunned during my time as ambassador. We deeply felt the tragedy of the death of the two young girls, but the vehemence of the street demonstrations and the anti-American activity that occurred was very shocking for Americans. I recall a telephone conversation in which I tried to persuade the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the House of Representatives to proceed on to Korea on a planned visit, and he absolutely refused to come. That was the state of the impression, and I think we have successfully overcome that, partly through the relationship at the top, partly through the genuine accomplishments that we've done, and I think, as Chris said, getting the visa waiver, getting the FTA, and getting it finally approved in Congress was a very important step. So we need to worry about public opinion and be as modern as old people like us can be. And fortunately, we have younger ambassadors in Korea now, and they're better at that than I was. But it is a time when we have to be dealing with that. I think another thing we have to avoid doing is sort of creating litmus tests for each other that become very difficult to fulfill. Obviously, during our George W. Bush administration, throughout the war on terror, we were posing all sorts of tests, support us on Iraq, etc. As has been pointed out, President Roh Moo-hyun responded very well to that, but with a certain amount of sort of political resentment. I think that we were making things tough for Korea. I hear in this session a couple of more issues that maybe are not as prominent as that, but one of the concerns I have, Dr. Park Jin raised yesterday with some vehemence, that is the bilateral nuclear accord, which we do need to renew, and which is often presented as sort of the litmus test of, does America really respect Korea? Why don't we treat Korea like an adult and accept their aspirations? I think surely there's a solution to that problem. And I think that solution lies in something that satisfies Korea's genuine technical needs, that satisfies Korea's genuine aspirations to be a major player in the nuclear power field at home and around the world, but one which also respects our common interest in non-proliferation on the Korean Peninsula and elsewhere. There's got to be an answer there somewhere, and I don't think that answer lies in emotions. It probably lies in a very rational assessment. Japan becomes another one of these things, and I think we all recognize the depth of Korean concerns about Japan. I think many Americans also wish the Japanese would find better ways of dealing with issues like the comfort women. But to somehow expect the United States to go beyond neutrality on such issues as what Kurt Campbell yesterday very carefully called the Liancourt rocks, I think to expect us to go beyond that is probably setting up a litmus test that we won't pass, and that probably isn't good for our common interests in regional security, which Chris talked about. I was somewhat surprised yesterday when several of the Korean speakers talked about the rise of China and its regional implications as being sort of at the top of the list of future challenges for the alliance. I had kind of expected to hear North Korea there, and I think North Korea still belongs there, but I was going to make in my own presentation the point that I think we do have a common interest in the peaceful and constructive rise of China, and with the complicated task of dealing with all of the territorial issues, not only in Northeast Asia, but also the maritime issues in Southeast Asia. And I'm glad serious Koreans are thinking about that in the context of our alliance. And finally, I was glad to hear Ambassador Hill mention the FTA. I didn't think we heard enough about that yesterday. I think we probably didn't hear enough about economics, perhaps because this is a security forum. But I was very active after retirement in the business coalition pushing the FTA through in Washington, and that was, as Chris said, a very difficult task and a very important one. I think the FTA has added a very important new dimension to the alliance. It adds an economic element to what has been for a long time a very important political and security partnership. I think it's very important that it be well implemented. That means American firms have to take advantage of what it allows. It also means that sometimes recalcitrant Korean regulators and ministries have to make sure that it is implemented fully, and I think that's going to have an important impact on the views of U.S. investors about Korea, and as well as the American public. And then finally, we've said very little about the Trans-Pacific Partnership here. It's a subject that is often discussed in Washington. I know there's no real pressure on Korea to join TPP, and I certainly would not want to seem to be putting any pressure. But I do think it would be a shame if Korea, after going through this difficult process of getting an FTA with the U.S., after doing the equally difficult task of an FTA with the European Union, and now dealing with China and Japan, I think it really behooves Korea to make an early decision to join TPP, because I think it's going to become one of those institutions that brings the region together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Hubbard. Actually, the TPP is one of the issues we should discuss. I got the sign. I have only 15 minutes. That means I cannot summarize. Just I have to open the floor for question. I saw one hand, General Yamaguchi. I think he needs to be recognized first, because actually everybody mentioned about Japan.
Very much. Thank you very much for wonderful presentations. My name is Yamaguchi from Japan. I am a part of Troublemaker, I guess. And I just make two comments, or tell you two pieces of facts. One is, yesterday we discussed, I think National Assembly member Kim Jong-un mentioned about America's lack of America's effort to discipline Japan. But I support America's effort. And as Kurt Campbell said yesterday, American friends are quietly urging Japanese to do better job. And I think it has been, American friends have been helpful, particularly after the end of April, when we saw an article on Washington Post titled "Shinzo Abe's Inability to Face History." It was really striking but accurate. And then after that, we had a vacation the period, what we call the Golden Week. A number of LDP politicians visited the United States, met a number of friends, American friends here, and then all of them brought the messages back to Tokyo. So I'm really hoping that Abe administration has been listening to that kind of advices from American friends, as well as voices from Korean friends. And second point I would like to make is this year will be the good time for getting better relations between Korea and Japan, because we have number of jobs to get done together. For instance, we are going to revise U.S.-Japan Defense Cooperation Guidelines, which may have a relevant part to Korean Defense Ministry. So we have to be totally open to Korean Defense Ministry. Then we are going to promote kind of bilateral communication between two militaries. And more in bigger picture, yesterday I made a point that the last 60 years is exception for the Japan's history without thinking about Western Front, because Western Front was 200% secured by South Koreans and Americans, and thanks to the sacrifice and efforts of both peoples. Then I think it is almost a time for the Japanese to pay it back, and because unification of Korean Peninsula is appearing in sight. In any case, Japan should be in full support of South Korea, and whatever Japan should do, whatever the Koreans want, and Japan should never do whatever South Koreans don't want. So in that sense too, this is a good time to discuss, to start discussion for the future of this area, including peaceful unification of Peninsula and Korea, and the region with the unified Korea. Thank you.
Thank you, General Yamaguchi. I'm very much increased by hearing your very constructive thought. And okay, this is a young gentleman in the front row.
Garrett Redfield, U.S. Korea Institute. My question is specifically directed to Ambassador Hubbard. I had a chance to have a very fruitful discussion with a previous counterpart of yours, Mr. Evans Revere. And in discussions with him, he felt that the diplomatic channels of talking to North Korea's vice ministers and foreign ministers has kind of run its course. And instead, he suggested that we need to take a new approach where we're talking to the inner circle elites, and we can have a healthy discussion whether or not that's Jang Son-taek, Kim Kong-hee, Kim Jong-un, the real decision makers of North Korea, as opposed to the vice ministers and whatnot. I would greatly welcome your thoughts on his perspective, and whether or not you feel that taking such a new approach would yield better results for U.S.-North Korean relations.
Ambassador?
Well, as usual, my friend Evans Revere is very perceptive, and I think he is right that we have conducted for nearly 20 years a dialogue with the foreign ministry people whom the North Korean regime has designated to talk to us. I first met Kim Gae-gwan in 1993 in New York when we paired off as part of our two negotiating teams, and he lasted far longer than Chris Hill did, and far longer than me, and he's still there. And I still don't think they necessarily provide a good window on North Korean thinking at the top, and certainly they haven't helped us. They haven't solved the problem, as we all acknowledge. The problem is, in diplomacy, you usually have to negotiate with the people that are designated to negotiate with you, and it's very hard to overcome that. We have tried through track 2 meetings and things like that to somehow bring in some new players, but it doesn't really much work. I'm always struck. Perhaps Chris, you were watching the funeral ceremonies for Kim Jong-il, and I looked at all the people surrounding the coffin, and there was nobody there I recognized, and I've been dealing with North Korea for 20 years. But it's very hard to get over that. I think the only way really to get to the top leaders is for one of our top leaders to go. And as she said last night, Secretary Albright had a long and I think productive and revealing meeting with Kim Jong-il when she went to Pyongyang. I helped set that visit up. Jimmy Carter had a very productive meeting with Kim Il-sung that started things off, but it's really very hard to do that. And back in 2000, when Albright visited North Korea, her visit was seen on our side in part as a visit that would advance a subsequent visit by President Clinton. And in fact, I had White House advance people in my team when I was in Pyongyang setting it up. And Clinton didn't wind up going to North Korea. One, because we didn't get quite all we wanted, particularly with regard to assurances, restrictions on missiles. But secondly, as you recall, the U.S. election in November of 2000 left quite a confusing state. Nobody knew whether Bush or Gore would be president for several months, and I'm convinced that if Gore had won, Clinton would have gone to North Korea. I think maybe if Bush had been declared the winner the day after the election, Clinton would have found time to go. There were mixed views on whether that was advisable. I wasn't one really advocating that visit at the time, but just imagine what the world would look like now, the peninsula would look like if that Clinton visit had taken place.
Ambassador Hill?
Yeah, I have a somewhat different perspective in the sense that I don't think there's a key to North Korean denuclearization lying in some drawer and we just haven't opened the right drawer to find the key. I don't think it's so much that. And in short, I don't think it's about channels. I don't think it's about formats, whether it's 6-party, 8-party, 4-party, 24-party, who cares? And I don't even think it's about personality. I mean, I talked to Kim Gae-gwan many times. And, frankly speaking, I wasn't talking to Kim Gae-gwan. I was talking to the note taker. I would slow down. I'd make sure the note taker got it. I didn't even care if he got it because it didn't really matter. It mattered whether the note taker got the thing right because he'd take it back to Pyongyang and some, person would read it and, well, that's interesting or that's not interesting, whatever. So I think if the North Korean leadership, and they read this stuff, but if they really wanted to do something about the nuclear weapons, if they really wanted to come forward and say, okay, let's see if we can have a real conversation, but we got to do it at an appropriate level because we don't want to look like we're giving up our nuclear weapons at the vice minister level, so we need to really, we got it. Believe me, we would figure out how to react to that. We got plenty of channels. I mean, if the North Koreans showed the slightest interest in doing that, that would be a different issue. So I don't think the problem is that, gosh, if we only talked to, what was his name, Sung-Joo, we'd be good. Or if we only could get to Changsung Tech, we'd get it done. I don't think it's that. I think, you should not just look at North Korea as individuals. You have to look at it as one of the world's worst, most miserable systems. And all of these people represent part of a system. So I think we did the right thing, by the way, with the 6 parties and keeping at it and showing the ROK public that we're serious, showing the Chinese that we're serious. I think that was all right. But I think at the end of the day, we have to face the fact that the North Korean leadership, even the people we haven't met or have been met only a couple of times by Madeleine Albright or Jimmy Carter, that North Korean leadership is not ready. And I don't think you're ever going to have a moment where an American negotiator, even an American president, says something and then Kim Jong-un hits the side of his head with the palm of his hand and says, oh, now I get it. Okay, thank you. We'll denuclearize. I don't think that's our problem. I think our problem is that it's a country that somehow feels that this is their way forward. And we need to convince them, not necessarily by talking to them, although that's part of it, but we need to convince them by the strength of our alliance, by the strength of our diplomacy with China, by the strength of multilateral processes, by the strength of our technology, and I'm including missile defense here. We need to convince them in a lot of different ways that what they're doing will lead to their own destruction. And I think a note taker for that purpose is just fine.
Okay, guys, I have time for just one question. I have to recognize it on this side, please.
Mike Pasetic, PBS NewsHour. This may seem more appropriate for panel 4, but since I have 3 diplomats in front of me, and the importance that diplomats hold to words, and the words you frequently hear are the United States and other countries will not accept a nuclear North Korea. What exactly does that mean? They've got X number of nuclear weapons. To the general public, that may look like ostriches. How do you get around this formulation? If you have a country, if you're dealing with a country that has nuclear weapons, but on the same level you say, I'm not going to accept a nuclear North Korea.
Okay. Who'd like to respond, please? Okay.
I mean, to me, it means we're not going to accept a nuclear North Korea. And by that I mean we will never have a normal relationship with a nuclear North Korea. We are going to look for ways to make the life of North Korea miserable. If we have to go to the moon to do that, we'll go to the moon to do that. We simply have to be prepared for a long struggle to deny them this aspiration. It doesn't mean that they haven't achieved some success in this aspiration. It doesn't mean that they haven't been able to, in some extent, abuse our efforts to try to buy time. But it does mean that we should never put ourselves in the position of somehow accepting it. And I think there's one issue where this has really come up, which is there are many people who hate the idea of negotiating with North Korea, who feel that somehow negotiating with North Korea is beneath our dignity. I mean, I think what they have done with that, because they're saying North Korea will never give up their nuclear weapons. No dictatorship will ever give up its nuclear weapons. Great, okay, what's plan B? And then they never have a plan B. And I think they unwittingly contribute to the sense in North Korea that, gee, they've already agreed that we're never going to give up our nuclear weapons, so we just have to be more patient and wait for everyone else to agree. So unwittingly, this kind of hardline view that somehow negotiations are a waste of time, they'll never give up their nuclear weapons, unwittingly, that hardline view has contributed to the North Korean belief that sooner or later we will come to accept them as a nuclear state. And my own view is we should never accept them, and we should be constantly looking for efforts, whatever they are, I mean, consistent with international law, and I think Americans need to be a little careful at times on these issues. But I think we ought to just continue to try to make their lives a living hell until they finally understand that nuclear weapons are not going to be part of their future.
Thank you. And Hahm, let's make some comments, final comments.
On this particular issue,
working.
On this particular issue, in addition to what Ambassador Hill just said, I think it means a couple of other important things. And one is that we will not accept North Korea's status as a nuclear weapon state, either de facto or de jure, even in the way the nuclear status is recognized or acknowledged in the case of India or Pakistan. That's one. The other is, if not now, in the long run, ultimately, our aim will continue to be to denuclearize North Korea. And just one little comment about earlier question about whether we find the right channel or not. I agree with Chris that it's not whom we talk to. It's not even whether we talk to them or not, as what kind of strategic or calculative decision that North Korea itself makes. Even when we talk about former President Carter's visit to Pyongyang, it's not Mr. Carter's persuasive skill that led Kim Il-sung to accept some of the things that ultimately led to the Geneva Agreed framework, as what led to his invitation to Pyongyang. It was the show of force on the part of the United States in the Eastern Sea. It was the Chinese notification to North Koreans that they would not exercise veto when the issue comes to the UN Security Council, which the Chinese government informed us and subsequently informed the United States that China had done. And these are the kind of things that led North Korea to decide to find an agreement with the United States. Not so much that suddenly they found Mr. Carter to be so persuasive. I think that we are probably placing too much emphasis on what kind of format, how many parties, which channel, which drawer to open, and so on.
Okay, with that, let me conclude this session. Please join me thanking the ambassadors for sharing experience and wisdom.
This concludes our first session. We will now take a 10-minute coffee break. Thank you very much.
Check.
two, two.